In this video, we will go through all the people who were executed in the United States during the month of August. We'll look at the crimes they committed, their final words, and the last meals they chose before facing execution. Byron Lewis Black, State, Tennessee. In March 1988, at the age of 31, Black shot and killed his girlfriend, Angela Clay, 29, along with her two young daughters, 9-year-old LaToya and 6-year-old Lakeisha. The brutal triple homicide committed inside Angela's apartment sparked a lengthy legal battle that would culminate 37 years later in Black's execution. Black's relationship with Angela had been marred by violence. In December 1986, he shot and wounded Angela's estranged husband, Benny Clay, injuring him in the shoulder. For that attack, Black was sentenced to 2 years in prison, but under a work release program that allowed him out on weekends. On one of those weekends, Sunday, March the 27th, 1988, Black picked Angela up from her job as a lab technician at Vanderbilt University Hospital. Their relationship was strained, and Angela had reportedly been considering reconciling with Benny. Black, infuriated, had allegedly threatened to pull a Sterling Gray, referring to a local judge who had killed his wife and then himself after she left him. In the early hours of March the 28th, Black entered Angela's apartment at 1101 Wade Avenue, Apartment B, and executed all 3 occupants. Angela was found dead in her bed, shot in the head while she slept. LaToya was found beside her, shot in the neck and chest at close range, and died within minutes. Lakeisha, the youngest, was found in another room with gunshot wounds to her chest and pelvis. Forensic evidence showed that she tried to defend herself before being shot from 6 to 12 inches away. She died up to 30 minutes later from the chest wound. The bodies were discovered the next evening, on March 28th, after concerned relatives called the police. By then, Black had already returned to the county jail at 5 p.m. that Monday, several hours before the bodies were found. He initially denied any involvement and gave conflicting accounts, first claiming he had dropped Angela and the girls off at her mother's home, then later telling a different version with his attorney present, saying he had gone to the apartment, found the bodies, and fled in a panic. Ballistics evidence became the turning point. The bullets recovered from the victims matched the one Black had fired at Benny Clay 2 years earlier. That forensic link led to Black's arrest on April 21st, 1988, and he was formally charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. Jury selection began in February 1989. Black's defense attempted to halt the trial by arguing that he was mentally incompetent, but the case moved forward. On March 8, 1989, a Davidson County jury found Black guilty on all 3 counts. The verdict was announced on what would have been Lakeisha's 7th birthday, a moment her father, Benny, called the best birthday gift for his youngest daughter. During sentencing, the prosecution sought the death penalty. On March 10, 1989, Judge Walter Kurtz sentenced Black to death by electrocution for the murder of Lakeisha Clay, following the jury's unanimous recommendation. However, the jury could not agree on the death penalty for the murders of Angela and LaToya, so the judge imposed 2 consecutive life sentences for those counts, along with an additional 15 years for burglary and 2 5-year terms for firearms violations. Over the next several decades, Black remained on death row as he exhausted every appeal. His case became more complex due to mental health issues. Experts diagnosed Black with intellectual disabilities, including fetal alcohol syndrome, lead exposure during childhood, and possible brain damage from playing football. All professionals who evaluated him, including the state's own expert, concluded that Black met the criteria for intellectual disability. Nevertheless, the courts rejected his appeals on procedural grounds. In later years, Black's health declined severely. By the age of 69, he was confined to a wheelchair and suffered from dementia, kidney failure, congestive heart failure, and other chronic conditions. In May 2024, doctors implanted a cardioverter defibrillator, a device that functions both as a pacemaker and emergency shock unit. On August 5, 2025, after Tennessee Governor Bill Lee denied clemency and the U.S. Supreme Court rejected his final appeals, Byron Lewis Black was scheduled to die by lethal injection at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville. His execution was set for 10 a.m. Central Time. His final meal was mushroom and sausage pizza, donuts, and butter pecan ice cream. He had no official last words. However, according to witnesses, shortly after the injection began, Black turned to a spiritual advisor in the room and whispered, "This hurts a lot." Black was officially pronounced dead at 10:43 a.m. Central Time, becoming the 28th person executed in the United States in 2025. Kayle Barrington Bates, State, Florida. On June 14, 1982, 24-year-old Kayle Barrington Bates committed a crime that would shock the small community of Lynn Haven, Florida. Janet Renee White, a 23-year-old newlywed working as an insurance agent, arrived at the office early that morning, returning sooner than usual, a detail that would prove fatal. Inside the small office, Bates had forced his way in through the back door and waited in hiding, ready to strike when Renee was alone. The attack was brutal. Bates tried to overpower Renee White, but she fought with all her strength. After a violent struggle, he partially suffocated her, dragged her to a nearby wooded area, and there he beat, strangled, and stabbed her twice in the chest. Still alive, she was left at the scene while Bates returned to the office to steal several items, including her wedding ring. During those terrifying minutes, the office phone rang several times, and at one point, Bates briefly answered before hanging up abruptly. But how did Kayle Barrington Bates reach the point of committing such a horrific crime? Born and raised in Florida, he led an apparently normal life. He was the father of a 3-year-old daughter at the time and served in the State National Guard. He had no criminal record and showed no warning signs of what was to come. However, in early 1982, he met Janet Renee, and what began as interest soon turned into an obsessive and dangerous fixation that ultimately drove him to commit the crime. According to the prosecutor's theory, later confirmed at trial, the motive was sexual. He attempted to assault her, and when she resisted, he attacked her until she was dead. Janet Renee White was only 24 at the time of her murder. She was a cheerful and hard-working young woman, newly married to Randy White just 10 weeks earlier, whom she had known since adolescence. They had an active life together, traveling and planning a family. Those who knew her remember her as charismatic, optimistic, and full of plans for the future. Returning to the crime scene, the strange noises and movements coming from the office caught the attention of a woman working nearby, who immediately alerted the police. Upon arrival, officers found Kayle Barrington Bates still near the scene, his clothes stained with blood and a ring in his pocket. Neighbor testimony, describing a man matching his description, loitering around the office before and after the attack, reinforced suspicion. Forensic evidence, including fingerprints, hair, and blood samples, pointed directly to him. Bates was arrested hours later and taken to the local police station, where he gave inconsistent and contradictory statements, alternating between denying and admitting his presence at the scene. During the trial, the prosecution presented a detailed and compelling case, showing the premeditated nature of the assault and the extreme violence of the attack. Expert forensic testimony and statements from the officers who discovered the crime scene were crucial. Bates was represented by court-appointed attorneys, who argued mental health issues and requested a review of the evidence. Despite the defense's efforts, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, armed robbery, and attempted sexual assault in August 1983. The sentence for this crime was death. Over the next 4 decades, the case went through a complex series of appeals, reviews, and clemency requests. Hearings examined Bates's mental state, and jurisdictional disputes arose between state and federal courts. In 1995, a resentencing hearing unanimously reaffirmed the recommendation of the maximum penalty. For years, the defense filed additional appeals, while Renee White's family attended every stage of the process, seeking justice and closure. While in prison, Kayle became a religious man, dedicating himself to studying the Quran and earning a reputation as a calm figure among other death row inmates. In his later years, he re-established contact with his now adult daughter. It was not until July 20th, 2025, that Governor DeSantis signed the death warrant, scheduling Kayle Bates' execution for August 19th at 6 p.m. On the morning of August 19th, Kyle woke around 4 a.m., showered and shaved. He was offered the chance to receive visits from family, lawyers, or chaplains, though in his case, no one came. Throughout the day, he remained isolated in a special cell near the execution chamber under constant supervision. In the hours leading up to the execution, he was given the opportunity to make a final phone call and receive spiritual support if he wished. Later, he was asked if he wanted a special last meal. He accepted and requested pizza and Coca-Cola, although he didn't finish it completely. During this time, according to sources, Kayle displayed some aggressive behavior, so the officers lightly sedated him in order to safely move him to the execution chamber. At 6 p.m., 67-year-old Kayle Bates was executed by lethal injection. He received a 3-drug cocktail and was pronounced dead at 6:17 p.m. When asked if he had any final words, he simply replied, "No." He remained staring at the witness gallery until he finally passed away, marking the end of his life after more than 4 decades on death row. Curtis Windom, State, Florida. On the morning of February 7, 1992, 29-year-old Windom walked into a Walmart in Ocoee, Florida, and purchased a .38 caliber revolver along with a box of ammunition. Outside, an old grudge awaited him, collecting a $2,000 debt from Johnny Lee. When he learned that Lee had recently won $114 at a Greyhound track, Curtis's anger erupted. Minutes later, he ambushed Lee in the middle of the street, shooting him in the back and finishing the attack at close range, as horrified bystanders screamed around him. But his violence didn't end there. After killing Lee, Curtis drove to the home of his ex-girlfriend, Valerie Davis, the mother of one of his children. Without saying a word, he shot her in the chest in front of her friend, Cassandra Hall, who stood frozen as she witnessed the crime. Fleeing the scene, he crossed paths with Kenneth Williams, whom he also shot, though this time the victim survived. Moments later, he intercepted Mary Lubin, Valerie's mother, and executed her inside her own vehicle. In just a matter of minutes, Curtis left 4 victims, 3 of them dead. Windom was arrested later that same month. His trial revealed a life riddled with neglect and tragedy. His initial defense was so incompetent that his first attorney was later disbarred and imprisoned for drug and alcohol abuse. Evidence was presented of his brain damage, learning disabilities, and long history of substance abuse. Windom himself claimed he was hearing voices and suffering from delusions in the days leading up to the murders. None of this convinced the jury, which sentenced him to death for 3 murders and added 22 years for attempted homicide. The next 33 years he spent on death row in near total isolation, with no regular visits and relying only on the letters of a pen pal. In his writings, he revealed the weight of his despair. "I'm still alive, but they're killing 2 people a month here," he wrote shortly before learning his final date. He wrote this because in 2025, Florida reached a grim milestone: 11 executions in just 8 months, making it the state with the highest number of executions in the country that year. Curtis Windom's case became the 11th, marking an unprecedented point in the recent history of the death penalty in the United States. The Windom case took on a different dimension due to the response from the victims' families. His daughter, Curtisha, left orphaned at just 10 months old, led a public campaign to save him, speaking of forgiveness and the heavy burden of trauma. "If we were able to forgive him, I don't see why people who haven't lived through our pain have the right to say he should die." Unusually, even the families of the other victims opposed the execution, making this one of the rarest cases in Florida's recent death row history. Still, the appeals failed. Governor Ron DeSantis eventually signed the final warrant, and the United States Supreme Court denied the last petition on August 27, 2025. On August 28, the day of his execution, Windom woke at 5 in the morning in good spirits. However, his mood changed when he realized that no visitors would be coming that Thursday. At 1 p.m., prison officials asked if he wanted a special last meal or preferred the regular prison menu. Windom chose his own final dinner: ribs, baked beans, collard greens, potato salad, and a slice of cake. At 6 p.m. on August 28, 2025, 59-year-old Curtis Windom was executed by lethal injection at the Florida State Prison. He was pronounced dead at 6:17 p.m. When asked for his final words, Windom remained silent.